Kia ora again, everyone. Good afternoon. It's wonderful to have this opportunity to chair this panel. We could say, after listening to Sir Brian Roche, going from a part of the public service that is potentially broken to one that is obviously in much better shape, or not, and that's what we're going to uncover. So we have four excellent panellists here. To my immediate left is Anne Tolley, who is currently the chair of Horizon Energy, but you will know her as Chief Commissioner, most recently, of the Tauranga City Council. She has also, though, a long history in central and local government, with a lot to do with local government through that time, including back when she was Deputy Mayor of Napier City Council back in the 90s. So Anne knows the system well from both ends, and she will be offering her views this afternoon. Nanaia Mahuta, of course, who was the Minister of Local Government that appointed Anne to be the Chief Commissioner at Tauranga City Council, has 27 years experience in Parliament, recently retired from Parliament, and is the Honorary Professor at the Te Kotahi Research Institute. That's correct. Wonderful to have you here. To their left is Frank Scrimgeour. Frank, I've known for a long time, the Professor of Economics at the Waikato Management School and an agent provocateur in local government, and I'm sure you'll be interested in his views. And down the end, in the other green jacket, is Jeremy Hay, the Chief Executive of RCP, which is the project management people who are representative, I think, of the industry that spends a lot of time working to try and get things built in the local government arena. And I should just note that I'm on the advisory board for, I'm an advisor on the board for RCP, just so that everybody's clear. So we're going to fire into it. And the first question I thought I'd ask all four panellists is, a lot of talk about local government. There's issues of delivery, is it delivering what it should? There's issues of revenue. We've seen big rates rises, a lot of disgruntlement amongst ratepayers about what they pay. We've got infrastructure issues. Arguably, we've got a democracy deficit and that the turnout for local government elections is not strong. So on the face of it, it's a challenging space. And so first question for each member of the panel is, what is going wrong with local government? And then your top two or three things. And then what is going right as well? Because let's throw a bouquet where we can as well. So we'll start at this end. Anne.
Kia ora tātou, everyone. Look, I'm really concerned for the future of local government. And that largely is as a result of central government. Central government doesn't trust local government. And I don't think it respects local government. And if you just look at the examples of things that are going dramatically wrong, the first is, you mentioned, the elections later this year. They are still having to rely on postal voting. Now, I don't know about anyone in the room, but I don't suspect many under 40 go out and check their mailbox. Under 30, they wouldn't even have a mailbox. And then if they're lucky enough to get their voting papers and they post them back in the mail, it's a lottery as to whether they get delivered on time to count their vote. So that's gone on for decades, and the central government has done nothing. If we want democratic representative democracy, and we'll come to that, I'm sure, you've got to provide a voting system that enables people to vote and enables a wide section of our community to vote. Because at the moment, the young people feel quite disorientated. So that's the first thing. Secondly, the valuation and the rating system on which all the finance is based is in dire straits. It was privatised years ago under Richard Prebble, I think. And now in New Zealand, there are only two firms that do the valuations. And so we have huge issues around timeliness, and we are having increasing problems around the quality of the work that they're doing, and an increasing number of challenges, which of course takes time. And many councils, when they set their new budgets, are unable to actually rate on those because they haven't got their valuations. And then we have the spectre of what's happening in Wellington, where the valuations come out and the market is saying, these aren't market values. Well, what the hell are they supposed to be? They are supposed to be market, based on the market, because the whole premise of rating is let the fat cats pay. So the more valuable your property is, the more you pay in rates compared to someone who lives in a less valuable property. So that the very basis for the funding for local government. That's not new. That has been raised with central government, again, for decades. And then thirdly, every time the government changes, we have these flip-flops and policies that take time and resources and a lot of ratepayers' money. The four wellbeings. I mean, I actually hate the term wellbeing, but cultural, social, environmental and economic, those are four things that are make up our communities, that are driven and maintained and encouraged by local government. Don't get central government building too many sports fields, playgrounds, etc. They are the role of local government. Labor puts them in, National gets voted in, they take them out. Labor gets voted in again and they put them back in. National gets voted in and they take them out. All of that costs time and money for local government, and what are they supposed to do? The second part of that, of course, is around transport funding, most of which comes from our road taxes, hypothecated fund, which is failing rapidly, never had any great faith in it, and it's being used for more than roading. The promise when it was set up was that you paid your petrol tax and it would be put into roading. But apart from that, the timing of that funding doesn't fit with local government's funding cycle. So a council puts together its budget, estimates what it's going to put into roading and how much it's going to get from government, goes out and consults on that, and hallelujah, a couple of months later, central government down in Wellington makes different decisions and they have to redo their budget. All of that's a waste of time. Worse, when there's a change of government, there's a change of priorities. And in Tauranga, we saw State Highway 29, which is the main freight route. How many of you travelled over that recently, over the Kaimais? That's the main route from New Zealand's busiest port, Tauranga, to here to Hamilton into Auckland. That was up for funding in the 2018 Transport 3-year program. It's a 3-year program, whereas councils are required to put together a 10-year infrastructure program. Every 3 years, central government changes that with its transport priorities. Tauranga missed that because Labor had been voted in by then, and they changed the criteria, and you needed to have public transport, cycling and pedestrians. There's not too much kiwi fruit goes in and out of the port on a bus, I can tell you. But however, so you have to redo all your plans and procedures and for the development of that road based on the new criteria. Put those in into the 2021. Yep, got some funding to actually now start doing the proper planning. Come 2024, National's back in and all of that's out and you've got to start again. How much ratepayer money is wasted through that process? And there's no sign that central government has any concept of what's happening on the ground in those councils. So for me, those are three things that are going dramatically wrong.
One that's going right.
I've got... I think the people involved are genuinely, as Brian talked about public servants, we have some amazing people working in our councils and elected to council who really understand their communities, really know what their communities need and want, and are happy to work to provide that. But they're just not being served well, I don't think, by central government, but that partnership that should be there with central government.
Well, you've said a bunch there, and we'll come back to some of those. Nanaia, your thoughts, what's wrong? You had the chance... Actually, I should have said to Anne, well, you had a chance to change some of this, but anyway, we'll come back to that. Nanaia.
E haere tonu ana ngā mihi kia koutou katoa tai mai I raro I te tuanui o tēnei whare tēnā koutou. I think I'll start on the other end, Stephen, with what's going right, because local government is the invisible public service. They do the things that the government cannot do, will not do, or would prefer not to do. And they do it on the basis that they have a fixed revenue stream, which is just rates. But look, Ratepayers and taxpayers are the same. The expectations in our communities are high. Local government is well versed with the planning cycle and processes required to engage with local community to reflect what aspiration looks like and expectation on services. So for all those reasons, I think the task for local government in this moment is very, very difficult. High expectations, fixed revenue stream, and also services that go beyond roads, rates and rubbish. Because if we take the implementation of the 4 wellbeings and the expectations of what's required adjacent to that, we're talking about public amenities, we're talking about recreational services, we're talking about the types of communities that we need our young people to stay in order to live, thrive and grow and be employed in their local community. Oh, and I didn't mention regional growth. I think local government understands the complexity of what's required on them, but we really don't see the fore of their strength until it comes to things like civil emergencies and national disasters, because government can't deliver in that space, and we see local government kick into place because they have that very tangible connection on the ground, grassroots, with their community. So I think that's a strength that they have. In terms of the big strategic challenges, infrastructure, and it is in relation to growth, and it is in relation to the inability to get the sequencing of funding cycles, planning cycles, but also government policy all in line to be able to deliver on that, and the lack of scale. So I experienced that firsthand, and what I can say is that the problem won't go away. We need a big strategic fix to our infrastructure challenges. We need perhaps more fluid conversations between central and local government about tasking and scoping our investment in this space in a strategic way that reduces costs on ratepayers, because ratepayers can't afford to pay for it. What I will say about tauranga, one of the challenges there is when democracy gets in the way, or councillors that fail to agree on the little stuff, how can they see through the big stuff? So if you want a job done, put a woman there to do it, because what happened was that the conversation was taken into the right space while maintaining dialogue with community. And so we have to be strategic going forward. I think we cannot afford to limit our view towards local government staying in the same space. But I would challenge the Public Service Commissioner, who had, I think, a very clear sense of what the task ahead is. You ignore local government at your peril. And if you don't think of local government as a part of the public service, that's a difficulty. The other big problem that I see in local government is if they read the signals too much about the changing political winds, they will fail to see the contribution that Māori can make to the regional economy by ignoring the way in which partnerships can occur. And that shouldn't be left to a political whim. That should be well grounded and entrenched, because throughout the whole country, Māori are demonstrating not only how they create value and add value to the regional economy on all sorts of layers, valuable partnerships can be gained over the long term from these types of partnerships.
Thank you. Thanks, Nanaia. Frank, all's well in local government?
So whether things are bad or whether they're really good, there's still lots of opportunity for improvement. And so I would like to put on the table 3 areas where I think we should have conversation. They're not nailed down, but they are worthy of discussion and development. The first one is to push back at the audit office and the audit profession and the whole process of auditing in our local government area. It seems to me this makes councils too adverse. It uses up a lot of funds, and it uses up a lot of council time in satisfying issues when they are not material. We do have to avoid misbehaviour, but we don't need to waste a zillion people's time. It's a bit like, the video ref interfering in the rugby game too much, and everyone's being worried about the video ref instead of getting on with the game. Second area is the issue of getting the right people on the job. And I think we've got a out-of-date governance model, the tension between executive staff and councillors, we haven't got that right. And so one idea that I'll put out there, which already exists, the idea of executive mayors, where they have more authority, and if you like, they don't have to go and beg the chief executive to get a decision. Now, there's a lot of issues in that kind of space, but I would like to have greater leverage from the elected people. And while you're thinking about that, could you imagine Chris Hipkins or Chris Luxon trying to run a government without cabinet ministers? Well, it seems to me mayors are a bit powerless in terms of their ability to influence councils. And of course, councils themselves don't always have the perfect mix of personnel in the team. And so I'd like to see greater capacity, greater encouragement to appoint people with relevant expertise to get things done. And then my third point is I think we've got too many institutions. They fall over each other. They get in each other's way. What I say, it's not easy to reform institutions, and I don't think the answer is the chippy approach to the polytechnics, to make the decision and then work out how we'll make it work. I think we need to have the conversations first and work out how things could be done. But I observe we have not a bad system with club rugby, provincial rugby, we've got the chiefs. We know how to make it work together without fighting each other. I think there's enough intellectual capital and goodwill in this room to do a whole lot better in this space. And so rather than me proposing how it should be done, I think a few more of us should be engaged in deep conversation to navigate a path forward in that space.
Very good. And there are quite a few councillors, mayors and chairs in the room, so we might ask them all later. But actually, Frank, I think you've moved back a little bit from where you were in our pre-discussion. Weren't you questioning the whole regional layer of government?
Well, I think...
Sorry.
I think it is unclear to me why we need regional councils as separate entities at this point in time. That's not to say that there aren't important things happening there at the moment, and that's why I think there should be a serious conversation about where those responsibilities lie and how we do things better rather than worse if we were to take them out of the mix.
Very good. Thank you. I'll take that as a yes, and we'll come back to that.
One hand and the other.
Okay, so Jeremy, your job is to work with councils to achieve their infrastructural aims.
Yeah.
What do you see?
Sorry, Stephen. First of all, I'd say I completely agree with what Brian Roach said about the public sector, and that also applies to local authorities. I absolutely believe everyone goes to work every day with an absolute intention to make the places they live, work and play a better place, and they have the right objectives. The problem is processes getting absolutely in the way of productivity. I was sort of reflecting earlier, a good theme for the next local government conference could be constrained thinking in a constrained environment, because that is the world we live in. We have 58 local authorities, be they regional or local, across New Zealand. That's the size of Sydney. How do we honestly think we can be productive and efficient where we have capability constraints? We don't have enough engineers. We have capacity constraints in our infrastructure, and we obviously have capital constraints. We can't raise enough funds. So we've got to rationalise the remit of local authorities. I think we need to rationalise the number of local authorities. We need to streamline and standardise how they deliver things. And we've got to... Productivity is a massive buzzword, I get that, and productivity is partly about how people work, but productivity equally relates to infrastructure. We've got to get more utility out of the infrastructure that our local authorities own, And a wonderful example of that is obviously water. Building more sewage treatment plants and more water treatment plants sounds like the right idea, but the reality is we need to minimise the amount of use of the infrastructure that we have. Volumetric charging for water. Auckland houses on average use about 150 litres per day. Aucklanders are on volumetric charging. Whakatane, which is not on metered water, uses about 500 litres per day on average. So, you know, it's not about building more infrastructure, it's about getting better utility out of our infrastructure. And I honestly think we need to have a really good conversation about that, because we can't afford to build more. We can't afford to increase rates from a capital and capability perspective. So I think we just need to get smarter about what we deliver, how we charge for it, and how we streamline that delivery by not using 58 local authorities to do things 58 different ways, which is exactly what we see across the industry.
Great, well, that's a great start. I'm going to start with the governance end, and then we'll work our way through if that's all right. Frank raised the issue of executive mayors. I have to say we have one in Auckland, and he does seem to make a bit of a virtue out of going around saying, I wish I could do something about this. So I'm slightly struggling with whether it makes any difference. But as executive mayors, there's also appointed potential people, and of course Anne was appointed as a commissioner in Tauranga. That's one extreme, of course. But is anybody else taking up Frank's? Because Frank, I think you were sort of like appointed councillors. Is that what you're saying, alongside the elected ones?
Yeah.
That's what I'm putting on the table as a real possibility.
I support that, and we put that up as part of the Future for Local Government, that big exercise that was done a few years ago, as a mixed model, the DHB type model, where you have, I believe in representative democracy. You need local people, it's their communities, and you need that voice. But at the same time, these are large, complex businesses that you're running. They're not most of the larger councils. And so you need some of that expertise. You need good financial, you need good people who understand what it is like to run a big organisation, and to have a commissioner, the local government commissioner appoint that. So it's not a political appointment, not appointed by the minister, because they tend to be a bit political. But if you had it from someone independent, like the local government commissioner,
would they have voting rights, do you think?
Absolutely. There's no point in being there if you can't vote.
But that's an interesting one, though, isn't it? Yeah. Because if the local government commissioner, it could change the political makeup of the council.
And why is that a bad thing?
Well, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Nanaia, you would have had the chance to think about this.
I did have a chance to think about it. I'm not a proponent of it. I do think that we're a small enough country to preserve the core features of our democratic representation. We might well look towards the broader challenges of whether or not councils are operating at the most efficient level given their size and scale. And that's a very legitimate question to be responding to now and at this very difficult time. What I would say, though, is that once you get the big gnarly challenge out of local government, they can focus on what they do really well, which is about, great places to live, grow and thrive. The big gnarly challenge is infrastructure and not being able to fund for what is currently in front of them to what's required for growth. And that was basically the reason why I took the track that I took. But it'll be a popular vote, I'm sure, for any Minister of Local Government who wants to advocate for an executive mayor in this current environment. I just don't think it'll be a runner. That's the politics of me. The pragmatic aspect to this, though, is that if we don't try and advocate for the reform of local government in a way that makes them more sustainable, and that we have the core components and features of what we all value, which is democratic representation as well as, I would argue, ensuring the diversity of that representation. And of course I'm biased because I know that Māori are here to stay and they make a valuable contribution, but we're becoming more ethnically diverse as well. So we have to have greater diversity in our local representation. We've got the core tenants. I am worried, though, because there's some real bad behaviour. We had a conversation just quickly before we came in. Bad behaviour in local government and the code of conduct aspect, even though it's there, it's probably not used strongly enough for some councils who have very bad behaviour.
So if we maybe park the idea of executive or appointed members for a minute, I mean, one of the reasons we'd talk about that is because of what councils do, and of course one of the most complex things they do, and Nanaia's alluded to it, is water, which is water and roading, very engineering focused, very long dated, and yes, other things are as well, but water in particular, and we've seen failure in that respect around the country. Is it the right idea to take water away, or take it, volunteer? Should water be separated one way or other from councils?
I wouldn't put it that way. I think I supported what Nanaia was doing, which continued on from where our government was heading, which is that there are too many councils trying to manage quite resource-intensive waters, whether it's storm waters, grey water, drinking water. So trying to amalgamate them into a bigger organisation that has the capacity then to invest is really critical. The difficulty that local government had, what local communities had, was first of all they didn't like the co-governance. That's no news. But also they didn't like losing ownership of an asset that they'd paid for over the years. So if you can get, and councils were talking, and I see Paula here, and Tauranga and Hamilton were talking really sensibly, because you need size, you need that in order to be able to manage the huge capital resource that you have to raise in order to invest. And it's only those big councils that can then throw their arms around the smaller councils who simply cannot afford to do it. The standards are increasing and will continue to increase. And in the Eastern Bay of Plenty, it's a very poor area with 3 small councils, and they struggle to keep up with providing the infrastructure. So their hope is to combine with some bigger councils and get some size. That seems logical sense, but the ownership of the asset, you need professional management, but the ownership of the asset, I think, should stay with the people.
Because it's ironic, really. The biggest secret is that, or the unknown thing is that actually the Labor government's approach to water reform is not that different from the current government's approach to water reform. There's differences.
Just that might have been taken out.
Well, yes, there's that part.
The co-governance.
I was going to come to the governance, but there's the governance and the transition, right, where the assets went, were the 2 big differences. But in an operational sense, the idea was the same.
Yeah.
Jeremy, from a sort of deliverer perspective, what do you need to see in water organisations to be able to do it efficiently?
First of all, I keep questioning myself why local authorities would want to own these assets. They're a massive liability, they're a massive burden. There's a psychological view that giving away ownership is giving away something. But, Stephen, I think the critical thing is we need to standardise the design of the infrastructure. 58 different designs for 58 authorities, admittedly, some of them are regional, is crazy. We need to standardise the specification so we can get greater scales of economy out of our market and out of international markets. And critically, we need to optimise procurement. The procurement system in New Zealand is just frustrating the construction industry so much. I call it the cancer of construction. Too often we're procuring on lowest cost, not long-term value. So if we can optimise how we design these systems, how we specify the systems and standardise it, and then procure on value, not cost, then not only are we going to get greater productivity out of the contractors and consultants that we have out there, but the cost to deliver this infrastructure will be substantially cheaper. And if we actually start charging people for something that they think is free, they might respect it a little bit more, use a little bit less, and we need to build a little bit less infrastructure, which will cost us less, which will mean it'll be lower rates impact on people.
So clearly you're not being...
To cut to the chase, though, for as long as the debates continues to, I guess, promote that water's infrastructure is an asset, holus bolus, you know, no one's looking under the bonnet. That's a political argument. Someone needs to look under the bonnet, do the assessment, identify are these assets or liabilities, and then do that investigation, because then the numbers absolutely don't lie. When you get the modelling, you have to aggregate to get scale to make these long-term decisions that are going to be more efficient for the country. And the, you know, just to be really clear, I think that's the headwind that I faced when I was, you know, putting through the reform, was that the political argument didn't really want to look under the bonnet, do the investigation, get the numbers, ensure that they really understood what the scale of the challenge is. Local government cannot afford to fund repairs and maintenance. They make trade-offs through their LTPs based on what the community feedback is. Because pipes are under the ground, you know, it's a no-brainer. Let's just go and do the nice stuff that kind of people see what's on top as well. You know, that's just not the future for New Zealand. We have to be more strategic. And if we're not, it's at our peril. It's at our peril. The biggest issue politically with having the assets argument is there is a strong appetite coming from local community, no matter what colour you vote for, against privatisation of a core asset that delivers a core function, which is drinking water.
Yeah. But there's another part to this, isn't it, is housing. And we've got a big problem with lack of housing. It's a bit subdued at the moment because of the state of the economy and where interest rates have been. But at some point again, cities like this one, like Tauranga, quite quickly, are going to be faced with the same challenge again, which is not just the provision of water services and roading services, but how they pay for them. And that's a problem. Now, government's made some moves on debt limits and so on. But don't we have to tie the asset to its funding? I mean, that's what you were trying to do, I think, Nanaia, with the water stuff as well, which was to find a way of borrowing against the life of the asset. It makes no sense for people, ratepayers today, to be paying full cost for a 30, 40-year asset, 50-year asset. And
do you want me to put my slide up?
Yeah.
Show you talking about housing.
Can we put the slide up, please? Who's the magic slide person?
I used to use this slide a lot. People don't understand, you know, councils that are growing, and most councils across New Zealand at one time or another face the prospect of having to provide more housing. And most people don't understand just how long and what the process for that is. So this is what you go through, and this process from start identifying it through to actually building a house on it can take, if you've got a tailwind and all goes well, 10 years. If you have to go off to the Environment Court in the middle of all that, then it can take longer. And in the case of Tauranga, if the government changes and the roading priorities change, it can make a huge difference to whether you can actually develop this, because NZTA will say, no, the road, the major road that's going past your housing development can only either can have no housing, no entrances and exits on it, or it can only sustain, in Tauranga's case, 1,500 when the land could actually take 3,500. So you start developing and all your costs start accumulating for 3,000 houses, but you can only bring 1,500 to market until the road is upgraded in 10, 15, 20 years' time. And councils incur the costs right through, on that slide, I haven't got it in front of me, right through to sort of 5, 6, 7, into the 8th and 9th year when they can start getting development levies paid by the developers. So the ratepayers are funding and underwriting all of that. And in Tauranga, we finished off a subdivision with the final development levies paid, and it was 30 years later. So a big part of council debt is just carrying the cost of all that development, because the developers decide when they bring those sections to market, and when they bring them to market is when they pay the development levies. In the meantime, the ratepayers are underwriting them.
Right.
And this is where we need strategic leadership, right?
Absolutely.
Integrated infrastructure investment with a long window so that we can do these big things. You go to other countries, you know, they are future-proofing areas tagged for growth. They've already got the infrastructure, roads, power, communications, water services, and then the next bit of infrastructure that goes on top of the buildings and facilities in the homes. They are future-proofing because they have a more strategic approach to their national infrastructure, and water is a part of that picture.
A lot of those places would use special purpose entities and things like that, companies effectively to set up, to development companies that the councils set up as well. Frank, your thoughts on this?
I think this future-proofing idea is fundamental, but it comes back to that institutional kind of thing. To me, where we have in the greater Waikato, shall I say, many well-meaning people working very hard, but we have a range of different district councils, we have Future-Proof, we have the River Authority, we have too many entities in play, but we need to have a simpler process so that we can do the future-proofing, but it needs to be a simpler process which enables voice to be heard. And I think people get into their defensive kind of positions because they're worried about their voice not being heard, and so we need to make sure that as we try and get these longer-term strategies that can last, we are giving the opportunity for voices to be heard. And I guess we've talked about the importance of the Maori voice. I suggest to you there's a lot of people in the rural Waikato worry about Hamilton calling all the shots. And so we need to have a conversation about how we can address that concern rather than ignore it.
Okay. So we're talking a lot about the problem. Because I wonder whether it's just too complex. I look at that slide up there that Anne's got, and you sort of go, this is a lot for any organisation to get their heads around. And maybe this is all borrowed from a time when development was a bit more slower paced and a bit relaxed. And there's a couple of things that spring to mind. Firstly, in Auckland, for better or worse, there's water care. And sometimes better, sometimes worse, but it's an entity in its own right. And it debates with developers about where they're going, and it charges for new infrastructure and things, and it's taken right out of the council. So I sort of sit there and think of that. And then you know, more perhaps unconstrained, you think of places like Texas, where they don't have all these planning rules and things like that, and they just go and say, well, you know, the predisposition is you can build your house, or you can build your subdivision, and then if there's a problem, then we'll deal with it. But we're not overly planning everything. We're just letting it happen. And are we over planning everything?
I think we are. Well, I mean, I think that tells us that we are.
Right. Because in Christchurch, after the earthquakes, the Tsar, Jerry Brownlee, just released 30 years of land at once and said, well, you knock yourselves out.
It was, in fairness, it was all in the pipeline, wasn't it? It was all. It was
part of a 30-year smart growth plan.
That's right. So you come back to your future growth, which you've got in Waikato, and we had smart growth in Tauranga, where the councils all get together and put together a 30-year plan, and they've just done a new 30-year plan. But then councils, I mean, this is about planning, isn't it? Councils have to do 10-year plans. Then they have to review those every 3 years, which is in line with their cycle. So a new council can get elected in, change the 10-year plan. You may be halfway through that process, and a new council comes in and wants to do something different. So we don't do that long-term planning that Nanaia's talking about, that long-term strategic planning, or there's a change of government and their criteria for their share of the funding changes.
I was going to take you one further on that, because it's not even the whole government, because the transport policy could be at odds with the housing policy.
And it is.
And that speaks to the challenge that we're stuck in, is that the harmonisation between central government and its priorities with local government and its responsibilities are really at that don't come together.
Yep.
It's a mismatch. So councils will work really hard to proof up a really legitimate proposal, but it doesn't correspond with central government funding for transport, doesn't correspond with policy changes that are going through the mix. So, if we want to be productive and resourceful in a way where our regions and our local communities feel the greatest benefit, we need some strategic alignment and leadership on the issue of infrastructure. Otherwise, we're just not going to get there. That means policies, that means funding cycles, that means the ability to commit to certainty for these big, chunky, long-term investments, so that the wins, the political wins, aren't blowing things over on the way through. You just can have some certainty. What that will send to the businesses, greater opportunity, they'll invest. What that'll send to Māori, you care about our region, we know we can see what's happening, we'll invest, and it will start to turn lights on. That's what we need. At the moment, there are dim lights everywhere because no one knows what's happening.
Is Brian still here? We'll write to him. I want to pose something then, and it's sort of actually now happening a bit, but when you think about it, at central government and the way they organise themselves, I mean, frankly, maybe it just should be transport, housing and local government all under one roof.
It should be. It should be. I mean, local government
Nanaia
deserves its
smiled
own...
at me when I said that.
Well, it deserves its own ministry. It's part of DIA.
Yeah.
When I took over as local government minister, there was only half a dozen people working in it. Yeah. And they were just reactive. They took no part. And the environment ministry was the one who sat around the table, and I elbowed my way and said, no, this is local government's responsibility. But we've now got a minister who has transport and housing.
Yeah.
The transport policy under successive governments never mentioned housing. Transport is an enabler of housing, and the two have to go together. So I mean, I think that's a good mix. That would be helpful.
It's a good challenge to think about on the back of Brian's presentation about the potential for devolution, and if we think about local government as the invisible part of the public service, because, you could totally fathom as a transition towards a more cohesive central local government partnership in itself, where you co-locate your government officers alongside council, they're making similar planning decisions, get the funding cycle right and all of that. So I'll offer that up and you're welcome.
So can I take it a bit further and say, should it be central government, local government, or should it be central government, regional government, and getting not only the officials but the elected mayors and MPs in the same room together, and so all of those people who are worried about my views about regional government, can I say there's opportunities for a new form of regional governance which has this kind of embrace and engagement and empowerment?
Well, if you took waters out of local government, you could equally argue these days that we should be looking at taking rubbish out of local government to get some scale there. I mean, it seems crazy that you can put 1s, 2s and 5s into recycling in this place and only 1s and 2s over here. So let's get some consistency around that, and I think we're moving towards that. Get some scale with some of that. So then you would have some very small councils that you should legitimately be saying, whether it's regional or sub-regional, because we want to keep our communities of interest, let's have a look at an amalgamation or a coming year. I've got to use the right word, don't I? You've got to have an amalgamation and have a smaller number then of territorial authorities. And I would say then You could also have a look at the catchments around which your regional councils are based and see whether you could have more unitary councils, because you've got bigger scale and you can maintain them better, and that goes to your point.
And if I can just go to the point on scale, that is one of the biggest constraints we have in
Yeah.
our country is scale. We do too many small things and reinvent the wheel too many times. We're working with a client, admittedly it's a private sector client, who's wanting to build $1 billion plus asset up in Auckland at the moment. We've got one international contractor that's interested in it. We cannot get any other international contractors interested in it because they have a real concern about a lack of pipeline, lack of visibility. For them to come to New Zealand, they will be lucky if they recover their costs off one project. So why would you invest here? There's a huge amount of capacity and capability and capital internationally, but it's not going to come here unless it has some confidence around what is coming through the supply chain. And unless we want to deliver infrastructure, and I completely agree with both of you and Nanaia, we need at a local and central level, government level, much more surety around our infrastructure programs, and then we'll get the investment, we'll get the contractors, and we'll get the efficiency out of the delivery. But and until we get out of our own way, we will continue to perpetuate a problem with low productivity and low efficiency.
And then we can train our kids into a sector where they are calling out for these skills, but there's no certainty of where that's going to go. So we shop around for a limited pool of talent in a critical sector.
And we'll keep our kids in New Zealand. I mean, the engineering industry this year alone, you talk to the top or the big 4 or 5 engineering companies in New Zealand, they've made over 1,000 people redundant in the last 12 months. Wow. Not enough work. Right now there's not enough work, but we know probably 12, 18, 24 months' time we're going to have this flood of infrastructure coming through again. So, what are we going to do then? They'll all be in Australia earning 50 grand more per annum than they can here, and we're not going to be able to draw them back. We're not training them fast enough. We're not giving them the opportunity. So we have the ability to build an amazing pipeline for New Zealand, which is really, really efficient, but we just need to get out of our own way.
Well, I can safely say a lot of the modelling's been done to be able to bake that into the current model, and sitting in abeyance, should there be a will, also a way to include Māori in that picture.
Just coming back, there's an issue with democracy, the democratic accountability and infrastructure. Let's be blunt. So, 3-year cycles. And I don't want to get into the whole 3-year, 4-year cycle thing because actually I don't think it matters. 3 years or 4 years still doesn't match an infrastructure investment cycle, right? Yeah. So the problem we get is this flipping and flopping between governments. Now, on one level, whether it's local government or central government, that's the democratic right? So you go to the country or the town and you say, I want to build this road or not build this road, the public supports you. So at one level you can understand it, but it's the constant relitigation of projects once they've started. And that's why I wonder whether there's more room for what I would call special purpose vehicles that are set up. So once the democracy's over, we've decided to do something, then we put together a special purpose vehicle to build it. And they've got a specific instruction to do it.
And they get on and do it.
And get on and it's contracted and so on. It's left to people to get on and do it. It just feels that that's the only way you're going to get around. Otherwise, we're going to be ping-ponging. I mean, the example you gave about State Highway 29, you add Cameron Road to that in Tauranga.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there was, as I understand it, there was a funding arrangement with the previous government. New government comes in, it's gone.
That doesn't meet the criteria.
I mean, in a way, Stephen, SPVs to execute a project are very valid ways to do things, but you're going to end up being in a situation where whoever the decision maker is will pick winners, and then there will be losers. That's the challenge. Going through a more strategic shift where you're getting certainty of pipeline investment and big infrastructure that works for the whole country, takes away that winners and losers element. But, SP vehicles for all sorts of things are a way of executing projects. But someone, in the end, will determine which priority will take the fall.
So we did quite a lot of work around city deals, and the government's been talking city deals. and I went over to Brisbane and had a look. So they got 12 councils to work together there to put the bid up to get the Olympics there. It took them something like 6 years, I can't remember the figures now, but 6 years to get the agreements, sorted out with the councils. And then they put the deal, they worked out that they would build the infrastructure, each one of them would take a different part of the infrastructure, and they put the deal together and took it to state government and then federal government. And then, of course, were successful in getting the Olympics. And that deal now is sealed with, and it's gone through one round of elections where I can't remember, state, I think it might have been federal government changed, one of them changed, but the deal still remains. There's a separate board that is overseeing the delivery of what was agreed, and the funding pipeline is there, and they're just getting on with it. And I think, that sort of model, if we can't get, because whilst I agree with Nanaia, getting that agreement politically on that strategic is going to be hard. Using those special purpose vehicles might be a way that we can actually get on and get some stuff done.
And your other point about regional and city deals, because I was a cynic to start with, and now I'm a bit more of a convert. Because the interesting
how
thing,
they're put together.
Well, if they're put together well,
That's right.
then it's actually a brave council or a brave government that comes in and tips up a city deal or a regional deal between a region and central government.
Yeah.
Because if you've thrashed it out and you've got to a point, I remember when we did the Tauranga Eastern Link, that was one of the most painless bits of infrastructure investment ever, because when I turned up as Transport Minister, the whole Bay of Plenty had agreed that was the priority.
That's right.
Even Whakatane and Rotorua, which didn't, but they agreed that was the priority. So, the Minister just had to come in and sign on the dotted line and find some dough, which, rather than having an argument with Rotorua and Tauranga and everybody else. So there's a power in that, definitely. So for regions to put what they want.
From a parochial point of view, our region in Tauranga won't miss out in a city deal scenario, because the growth forecast is very significant and there's opportunities. So you've got to ask yourself, okay, in terms of equity of treatment and regions who may miss out, what's the trade-off there? And that ends up being the conversation, but again, from a regional parochial point of view,
but there might be a resilience.
Our region would absolutely benefit from a city deal.
But there might be a resilience question though too, isn't it? Because you have got growing areas and then you've got areas with big resilience problems.
Yeah.
And Jeremy, you've seen some of that in Hawke's Bay and other areas.
Yeah, a huge amount. And I was just listening to the conversation. There's got to be some core infrastructure that we should be able to get bipartisan support on. Everyone needs to be able to drink water. Ideally, you want to be able to flush your toilet. And ideally, when it rains, the water doesn't flood your backyard. So I appreciate there's still a bit of political diversion around building roads, but my honest view is that's direct correlation with productivity of our country. If we can't move freight in the geographically constrained country we've got, then we've got a problem. I think it was to your point, Anne, around the kaimais and Tauranga. So I struggle to understand with some core infrastructure in particular why we can't get bipartisan support on. Delivery might be secondary, but how we set up the right structures to enable the delivery, which is to your point, Stephen, SPVs doesn't mean you have to give away ownership. The SPV can still be owned by a bunch of local authorities. You just get private entities designing them, procuring them, operating them, but the ownership stays with the community. We just need to be smarter in how we aggregate it, procure it, and ensure it gets delivered.
We haven't got a huge amount of time left. I want to come back to something that Anne said at the start, which relates to all of your views, and that is the way we elect councils. Because there's no doubt about it, half the population doesn't engage. They only engage when it rubs up against them. So part of it, you've talked about amalgamation. And there's a whole bunch of Waikato councils you can discuss that with afterwards. But the voting system, the democratic accountability. So, Anne, you started. What do you think the answer is? Do we go back to voting on the day? What do we do?
Well, I think we're supposed to be unconstrained thinking.
Yeah.
we have to be able to vote remotely. We have to, electronic
Online, you mean?
voting, online.
Yeah.
And that's what young people, I mean, Tauranga is just so interesting when there was so much call for a return to democracy.
What was the turnout?
It was 41% or something. It was hopeless. Hopeless.
No, I mean, you must have thought about this.
Yeah, look, I not only thought about it, tried to introduce a model of testing electronic voting in partnership with a council who will remain nameless, but had enough scale for us to get really good intel onto the design, but also all the variables that sit around electronic voting. The idea was to make it work at a local level and then come in behind and fund further in order to roll that out with central government funding. Worked really hard to get the model in place, and then right at the 11th hour, the council didn't want to go through with it, politics. So, challenge. But I think electronic voting, but also the voting system, STV, I think that is a way to ensure that we get greater diversity of representation, and perhaps it will generate interest for people to participate. Civics education, the question will be whose responsibility. I say give it to local government. That is something that they could do legitimately, and it has been trialled. And then the last thing I would suggest is that if we wanted to improve participation in our democracy in a way that's sequenced, it's at every layer. It just doesn't sit in the local and central government. It's from everything from school boards to community trust to everything. So we've just got to be more concerted in our combined effort in this space.
Frank, what do you think?
So I think the voting system's one thing, but I think part of the issue is the lack of engagement in the 3 years before the election. And so I think, we've lost a world where there was genuine local journalists attending meetings and poring over the issues and providing good information back for citizens. And it's easy for citizens to feel they just get the PR push from the particular entity. So, I'd sooner, some of the PR expenditures in our council was reallocated as a fund for journalists. Or if that's too rich for you, a fund for student journalists to attend meetings and get issues out on the table and build the discussion. Engagement is essential for informed voting, for voting to actually occur.
Right. Jeremy, do you have a view?
I'm no expert on governance, but I do think the remit of local authorities is way too broad. I do think we should try and rationalise and be absolutely clear on what their remit to their community is, and then drive greater accountability to deliver on that. Obviously, people would say, well, democracy should drive accountability, but because of low participation, that's not happening. So is there a different way to ensure accountability? I mean, obviously, the extreme step is putting commissioners in to ensure stuff happens. But, the fluoridation debate that's happening at the moment, local authorities determining whether or not their community should be fluoridated, just seems bizarre to me. Why that's not a health decision as opposed to a local authority decision, and why...
It's a health decision.
Why?
It is.
Welcome to the political world.
Yeah. But why would councillors who have absolutely no qualification in that space be making a decision over something like that? I mean, it's just bizarre that we don't have a much tighter brief or remit for local authorities.
I'm intrigued by the...
Can I come back to Frank's comments? Because at one stage, and I just think we are required, and local government, I still say we, local government is required to consult on so much. I mean, so much. At one stage in Tauranga, I remember asking, how many consultation documents have we got out? And it was something like 15, 16. They're all different, and this is part of the relationship with central government, because they dictate how local government has to do all this stuff. The auditors even come and audit the questions that you're asking in the long-term plan.
And that's a problem.
And that is a problem. But you're assuming by paying journalists. Actually, I found the best reporting was done by the local democracy reporter that the government funded. But you're assuming that people are going to read a newspaper. And most councils now have their council meetings live fed. They're on social media, on YouTube. You know, the real trick is how do you communicate with your community? And too often it's through these crazy consultation processes where they don't believe that you're really consulting anyway, because you're not asking them what they think. You've already made up your mind what you're doing, and you're going out and asking them what you think about it, which isn't consultation. So we've put our population off, and they're difficult to reach now because they're on, you know, I mean, I think you're only over, if you read a newspaper, you're generally over 60, aren't you?
Right. That's probably as good a place to leave it. We've gone from sorting local government out to sorting the media out, which I do have some views on. So look, can I thank our panellists? It's been a fantastic conversation. Jeremy Hay, Frank Scrimgeour, Nanaia Mahuta and Anne Tolley. We didn't solve all the world's problems, but I think we made some steps forward, and hopefully, I think there was quite a lot of common ground.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you to the panel on local government, and welcome back to those of you that were in the gene technology session. I jumped into that one too. Fascinating discussions there as well. All right, we are about to take a short break before we get into the home stretch for the afternoon. The time is, we'll need to make up a little bit of time. So let's be back here seated at 3:05, so we've got about 15 minutes. Our next session is very pertinent for the environment. It's about the future of the university sector. We've heard Minister Nicola Willis today. The first priority around lifting productivity is growth in skills and talent. So the future of the university sector, followed by US politics and America at the crossroads, and it's all pretty quiet on that front, so that should be a calm close. So see you back here at 3:05.